My spiteful stepsister has always made it clear that I am not part of her family, but now she expects me to give up my home for her and her kids. Let me begin by saying that this is a bit of a long story, but I really need to get this off my chest. I'm Lexi, 25, and I have a stepsister, Brianna, who's 26. We also share two younger half-siblings, but this story mainly focuses on me and Brianna, or more specifically, on how she's been an absolute nightmare from the moment our parents got married. I was 7 years old when my mom married her dad, and I guess I was supposed to feel happy about gaining a new family and all that, but from the very beginning, Brianna made it very clear that she didn't want me around. I honestly have no idea why she disliked me so much, right from the start. I tried to be kind, like any 7-year-old would. I thought we could maybe hang out, become friends, or just play together. Things kids normally do. But no, she wanted nothing to do with me. She'd give me these looks, the kind that, make it obvious someone doesn't even want to acknowledge your existence. That was Brianna. No matter what I did, she always made sure I understood that I wasn't welcome. At first, I thought it might be because I was new to the family, or maybe she was upset about our parents getting married. But as time passed, it became clear it wasn't just that she genuinely didn't like me. Things got even worse at school since we attended the same elementary school. Brianna went out of her way to make sure everyone knew we weren't real sisters. She would say things like, "Oh, she's just my stepsister," or "We're not actually related," whenever someone mentioned it. She didn't stop there either. She actively humiliated me in front of other kids. One time during recess, she told everyone that I wasn't truly part of her family and claimed her dad had only married my mom because she needed a place to live. I was 7 years old. Who does that to a kid who's just trying to adjust to a new family? Her dad, my stepdad, noticed her behavior and stepped in a few times. He told her to stop and reminded her that we were all family now and she needed to treat me better. For a while, she seemed to listen, at least when he was around, but as soon as he wasn't there, she went right back to being horrible. It felt like she took pleasure in making me feel like I didn't belong. As a little kid, I didn't know how to handle that. Adjusting to a new family dynamic was already hard enough without someone actively rejecting me. There were days I'd come home from school in tears telling my mom about how Brianna treated me. My mom always said the same thing, "She'll come around. Just give her time." Spoiler alert, she never did. Brianna even tried to rope our younger half-siblings into her behavior. She would tell them I wasn't their real sister and that they shouldn't listen to me or spend time with me. They were too young to understand what was going on, but the fact that she would involve them in her hate campaign was beyond messed up. It seemed like she was constantly looking for new ways to upset me. I'm not going to say my entire childhood was ruined because of Brianna. I did have good times, especially with my mom and stepdad, who always did their best to include me and support me whenever I talked about Brianna's behavior. But there was always this lingering shadow, knowing that the one person who should have been my ally, my stepsister, wanted nothing to do with me, and when she did pay attention to me, it was only to make my life miserable. One of the worst incidents happened in middle school when Brianna spread a rumor that I had stolen something from her, which wasn't true. Kids being kids, they believed her, and suddenly I was labeled a thief. It was mortifying, and she knew exactly what she was doing. Her actions weren't just mean. They were deliberate attempts to ruin my life. Things got so bad that my stepdad eventually had to take serious action. Brianna's behavior became so toxic that she stopped coming over to her house for a while. He told her directly that if she couldn't even pretend to be civil, she shouldn't bother coming around at all. I'm not sure if what happened was the best solution, but honestly, it was a relief. At least I no longer had to deal with her constantly being in my space, making me feel awful. She ended up moving in with her mom full-time when she was around 13. I thought that might finally be the end of it, that maybe the distance would give her some time to reflect or something. But no, it didn't change a thing. We still saw each other occasionally for holidays, birthdays, and similar events, and every single time she made it obvious that nothing was different. She remained just as mean, dismissive, and determined to make me feel like an outsider in my own family. By the time we were teenagers, I'd completely given up on trying to have any kind of relationship with her. I mean, why bother? I'd spent years being nice and reaching out, and she had never once made any effort to meet me halfway. So I decided to stop caring. If she wanted to act like I didn't exist, then fine. I wasn't going to waste any more energy on her. I can still recall the last time we had any interaction that wasn't openly hostile. We were both 16 and she had just had her first child. Yes, she got pregnant at 16 and moved back in with us for a while. You'd think that becoming a mother might change her, soften her or something, right? Nope. She was still the same Brianna. If anything, she became worse. She refused to let me anywhere near her baby. She told me outright not to touch her child, speak to them, or even look at them, as if I were some kind of dangerous person she needed to protect her kid from. That was when I knew with absolute certainty that we were never going to have any kind of sisterly relationship. She had made sure of it, and honestly, I was done trying. I had my own life to think about, and if she wanted to stay bitter and hateful, that was her decision. But I wasn't going to let her drag me down anymore, so yeah, that's where it all started. It's been years since I last saw her, and I honestly thought I'd moved on, but apparently she hadn't. To pick up where I left off, I hadn't seen or spoken to Brianna in years, and I was perfectly fine with that. My life was going smoothly without her drama, and I was doing my own thing. Then, a couple of months ago, I got a phone call from my mom. She's not someone who calls me without a reason, so I knew something was up immediately. I answered, and she started with, "Hey, Lexi, we need to talk." Right away, I thought, great, what now? My mom has this way of softening bad news, so I already knew whatever she was about to say wasn't going to be good. She started casually, telling me how Brianna had been going through a tough time recently. Apparently, Brianna lost her job a few months back, and not long after that, she lost her house. Now, she and her 4 kids were living with my mom and stepdad, and as my mom put it, things were a bit tense. At this point, I was just listening, but I wasn't feeling the least bit sorry for Brianna. I mean, how could I, after everything she's done? Then my mom dropped the bombshell. Brianna had been asking if she and her kids could stay with me for a while. I swear, I almost dropped my phone. Stay with me? The same person who couldn't stand me for years now wanted to move into my house with her 4 kids? I didn't even know how to react at first. I just sat there in silence for a moment, trying to process it. My mom took the opportunity to keep talking, explaining how cramped their house was and how it would really help if I let Brianna stay with me, just until she got back on her feet. Here's the thing. I've worked hard to build my life. I have my own place, a job I'm proud of, and a drama-free existence. The last thing I want is to bring Brianna and her chaos into my home. Plus 4 kids? That's not just a small favor, that's a whole new lifestyle I didn't sign up for. So I told my mom, I don't think that's a good idea. Naturally, she tried to convince me otherwise, saying, "Lexi, she's your sister, she's family. Don't you think you should help her out?" But honestly, family or not, I have my limits, and Brianna crossed that line a long time ago. I explained to my mom, look, I understand she's in a tough spot, but she's never treated me like family. She made her bed, and now she has to lie in it." My mom didn't like hearing that, but I wasn't about to let her guilt trip me into something I'd regret. That's when things escalated. The next day, Brianna called me herself. Keep in mind, I hadn't heard her voice in years. When her name popped up on my phone, my heart started racing a bit. I debated whether or not to answer, but I figured it was better to just get it over with. So I picked up, and before I could even say hello, she launched right into it. "Lexi, I need your help," she said, skipping any kind of greeting. She sounded desperate, which made sense given her situation, but it still threw me off. This was someone who had spent her entire life acting like I didn't matter, and now she was asking me for help, as if we were suddenly close. She went on to explain that she and her kids were crammed into a tiny room at my parents' house, and it wasn't working out. There was no space. Her kids were constantly fighting, and she was at her wit's end. I listened, but all I could think about was how horribly she had treated me for years, and now she expected me to step in and save her? Then she hit me with the most outrageous part. She didn't just want to stay with me, she wanted me to move out of my own house and move back in with our parents so she and her kids could take over my place. I almost laughed out loud when she said it. Was she serious? She basically told me that she needed my house more than I did, and that giving it up would be the family thing to do. I was stunned. I couldn't even find the words to respond for a moment. When I finally did, all I managed to say was, wait, you want me to move out of my house for you? I hoped I'd misunderstood her, but no, she doubled down. "Yes," she said, as if it were the most reasonable request in the world. "You can stay with Mom and Dad for a while. They've got plenty of room. It's just until I can get back on my feet." I was in disbelief. The same woman who had made my life miserable for years was now trying to push me out of my own home. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, and said, "Brianna, that's not going to happen. I'm not giving up my house. I've worked hard for it, and I'm not about to hand it over to you." That's when she completely lost it. She started yelling, calling me selfish, accusing me of not caring about family, and saying I was abandoning her when she needed help. She even brought up the fact that I don't have kids, as if that somehow made me less deserving of my own home. She was pulling every guilt trip tactic she could think of, trying to make me feel bad for refusing to help her. But here's the thing. I wasn't going to fall for it. Not this time. I had spent years trying to make peace with her, always being the bigger person, and it had gotten me absolutely nowhere. So I calmly said, "Brianna, I'm sorry you're in this situation, but it's not my responsibility to fix it. You've never wanted anything to do with me, and now I'm supposed to uproot my life for you? No." As expected, that didn't go over well. She started screaming even louder, calling me a terrible person and accusing me of turning my back on family. It was shocking how quickly she switched from being desperate to outright furious. I didn't know what else to say, so I just hung up the phone. After that, I didn't hear from her for a while, and I thought maybe she'd finally gotten the message, but I was wrong. A few days later, my mom called again, and this time she sounded really upset. Apparently, Brianna had been complaining to her nonstop about how selfish I was and how I was refusing to help. My mom, bless her heart, was still trying to be the peacemaker. "Can't you just let her stay for a little while? She really needs help, Lexi," she pleaded. But I wasn't budging. I told my mom the same thing I had told Brianna. I'm not giving up my house, and I'm not letting her walk all over me anymore. I've had enough. My mom wasn't happy, but I could tell she was starting to understand where I was coming from. Even she couldn't ignore how entitled Brianna was being. Still, my mom was stuck in the middle, trying to keep the peace between us. But I wasn't going to let Brianna use that to manipulate me again. Update. After the whole phone call debacle with Brianna, I felt pretty good about standing my ground. I figured she'd either find another solution or keep pestering our parents until they got tired of her. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore, and I could finally focus on my own life. Or so I thought. A couple of weeks later, on a Saturday, I was at home, relaxing and minding my own business, when there was a knock at the door. I don't usually get visitors, so I was a little surprised. I wasn't expecting anyone and honestly hoped it was just a delivery driver. But when I opened the door, guess who was standing there? Yep, Brianna, along with her 4 kids and several suitcases. My stomach dropped. For a moment, I just stood there, speechless, unsure of what to say. She looked at me with a serious expression and said, "Lexi, we need to talk." I could feel my face getting hot. At first, I wasn't even angry. I was more shocked than anything. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to stay calm. Her kids were standing there looking exhausted and confused, and I couldn't help but feel bad for them. But I couldn't believe she had actually shown up like this. Brianna let out a dramatic sigh, as if she were the one inconvenienced, which made no sense. "Look, Lexi," she said, "I have nowhere else to go. Mom and Dad's place is too crowded and they're getting frustrated with me. I thought you'd have a little more empathy since we're family." I felt my jaw tighten. Empathy? After everything she had put me through, she was trying to play the family card now? I was still trying to process the fact that she was standing on my porch, clearly expecting me to let her and her kids move in. "Brianna," I said, doing my best to keep my temper in check, "I already told you, you can't stay here. I don't know why you thought showing up uninvited would change anything." She rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. "You're being ridiculous," she said. "I'm not asking for much. We'll only be here for a little while, just until I can find a job and a place for the kids." At that point, I could feel my frustration rising. "You are not staying here," I said firmly, my voice louder this time. "I'm sorry you're in a tough spot, but you've never wanted anything to do with me, and now you expect me to just drop everything for you?" Her kids were starting to get restless, and I could see that this conversation wasn't going anywhere productive. But Brianna wasn't about to back down so easily. She shifted her weight and said, "This isn't just about me, Lexi. Think about the kids. They need somewhere stable. Don't you care about them?" Let me pause for a second here. Of course I care about the kids. They didn't do anything wrong, and it's not their fault that their mom put them in this position. But that doesn't mean it's my responsibility to fix her mess. I had no connection with them, largely due to Brianna ensuring I was kept out of their lives. So while I felt for them, I wasn't about to let her guilt trip me into taking them in. "I care," I said, striving to keep my voice calm, "but you made it clear a long time ago that I wasn't part of their lives. You didn't want me involved with them, and now, all of a sudden, I'm supposed to play the hero?" She glared at me, exhaling sharply. "This isn't about the past anymore, Lexi. You need to grow up. Things have changed. I'm asking you as a mother, not as your stepsister." I could hardly believe her audacity, as though her being a mother erased all the things she'd done to me while we were growing up. Taking a deep breath, I tried to compose myself, knowing this conversation wasn't going to end well. "Brianna, I'm not doing this. You need to leave." Her expression twisted into a mix of anger and desperation. "So, that's it? You're just going to abandon me and the kids? After everything we've been through, you're really going to let us suffer?" At that point, I'd had enough. I had been trying to remain calm for the sake of the kids, but her entitlement was too much. "You made your choice a long time ago," I said firmly. "You didn't want me in your life then, and I'm not going to let you use me now." Her glare hardened, her eyes narrowing. "You're unbelievable. You really think you're better than me, don't you?" That struck a nerve. I wasn't trying to act superior. I just wasn't willing to let her walk all over me. Before I could respond, her oldest child, who seemed about 10, tugged on Brianna's arm and said, "Mom, can we go? I'm tired." Brianna glanced at her, and for a moment, I thought she might give up and leave. But instead, she turned back to me and snapped, "You're making a huge mistake, Lexi. Don't think I'll forget this." With that, she stormed off, her kids trailing behind her. I watched as they loaded into their car, Brianna muttering under her breath the entire time. Once they drove off, I shut the door and leaned against it, trying to process what had just happened. I couldn't decide whether I felt more relieved or angry. Probably a mix of both. It was mind-blowing that Brianna would show up at my house, expecting me to give in so easily. I felt bad for her kids. They didn't deserve any of this, but I wasn't about to let her manipulate me into giving up my home. After she left, I called my mom to explain what happened. She didn't seem surprised, but sounded disappointed that I didn't offer help. "I understand, Lexi," she said, "but Brianna's in a really tough spot right now. Maybe there's another way you could help." I had already made up my mind. "Mom, I'm not getting involved. I can't. She's never treated me like family, and I'm not going to let her drag me down into her mess." My mom sighed. "I just wish things were different." "Me too," I admitted, and I truly meant it. But some things never change, and Brianna was one of those things. A few days after Brianna's dramatic visit, I thought that might be the end of it, that she'd finally understand I wasn't going to give in and would move on to pestering someone else. But of course, that wasn't what happened. I really should have known better. It didn't take long for things to escalate in a way I hadn't anticipated. Not long after, I got a call from my mom. This wasn't unusual, we talked fairly often, but the tone of her voice immediately set me on edge. She sounded tense, like she was trying not to lose her temper. "Lexi, I need to talk to you about what happened with Brianna," she began, diving right in. I sighed. "Mom, I already told you what happened. She showed up at my house and I told her she couldn't stay here." "Yes, well," she continued, "she's been talking to your stepdad and me non-stop since then, saying how unfair you're being. She's claiming you're turning your back on family, and..." She hesitated before adding, "She's even saying we should consider cutting you off for not helping her." I was momentarily stunned. Brianna was actually trying to turn my own mom and stepdad against me just because I wouldn't let her stay in my house. The nerve of her! Taking a deep breath to stay calm, I asked, "Wait, she's telling you to cut me off?" "Pretty much," Mom admitted. "She's painting you as heartless for not helping her as a family, and when they need it, she's really got your stepdad worked up. He's been saying we should be doing more to support her as a family." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mom, you know that's ridiculous, right? She's trying to manipulate you because I wouldn't give her what she wanted." Mom sighed heavily, and I could hear the weariness in her voice. "I know, Lexi, I get it, but things are getting tense here. Your stepdad feels like we should be helping her more, especially with the kids involved. And Brianna, well, you know how she is. She's making us feel like we're failing her as parents." Pressing my fingers to my temples, I felt the beginnings of a headache coming on. This was exactly the situation I had dreaded, Brianna dragging everyone into her drama and casting me as the villain because I wouldn't cave to her demands. Mom, I understand she's in a tough spot, but that doesn't mean it's my job to fix her problems. I've been very clear about why I can't help her. I know, Mom said softly, but you need to realize your stepdad is struggling with this. He hates seeing his daughter in such a difficult position and feels like we should be doing more to ensure the kids are okay. And there it was, the guilt trip. It wasn't even intentional on Mom's part, but hearing her talk about the kids that way made me feel like the bad guy. But I knew I wasn't. Brianna was clearly using her kids as pawns in her scheme, and I wasn't going to let myself fall for it. Mom, I'm not going to let Brianna guilt me into anything. I understand the kids are in a rough spot, but that's on her, not me. She made her decisions and now she has to face the consequences. Mom was quiet for a moment, clearly trying to figure out how to respond. Finally, she spoke. Lexi, I hate that it's come to this. I wish the family wasn't so divided. So do I said, my voice softening slightly. But this isn't my fault. Brianna has ignored me for years, acting like I don't even exist, and now suddenly she wants my help? That's not how family works. Another pause, followed by a sigh. I know you're right, but be prepared, Lexi. Your stepdad is really upset about this, and I'm worried he's going to take Brianna's side. Her words hit harder than I expected. I'd always had a good relationship with my stepdad, and the idea of him siding with Brianna because of her manipulation made me feel sick. But I couldn't back down now. I had to stand firm no matter how messy things got. Thanks for letting me know, Mom, I said quietly. But I'm not going to change my mind. I understand, she replied. Just be careful, okay? I don't want this to get worse. After hanging up, I felt a heavy knot in my stomach. No matter what I did, Brianna seemed determined to drag me into her mess, and now she was even turning my stepdad against me. It was exhausting, and I wasn't sure how much more I could take. But of course, Brianna wasn't done. A few days later, I started receiving calls from other family members, people I hadn't heard from in months. My aunt, my cousin, even distant relatives from my stepdad's side. Every one of them shared the same story. Brianna had been telling them how I'd refused to help her when she was desperate and homeless, painting me as the villain in her sob story. It was infuriating. I knew she could be manipulative, but this was a new low, even for her. I spent countless hours fielding calls from concerned relatives, all of them trying to guilt me into doing the right thing by helping her. I couldn't believe how quickly she had managed to turn them against me, especially since none of them knew the full story. At one point, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in over a year called me to lecture me about family values and accused me of letting my pride get in the way of helping someone in need. I was on the verge of losing it, but managed to stay calm long enough to explain my side. Look, I said firmly, you don't know the half of it. Brianna has treated me like dirt since we were kids. Now she expects me to give up my home for her? That's not happening. My cousin tried to argue, saying people change and that Brianna was just trying to survive, but I wasn't buying it. She hasn't changed at all, I said, my tone resolute. She's using this situation to get what she wants, and I'm not falling for it. By the time the call ended, I was drained. I couldn't believe how much of my energy Brianna was consuming, even though she wasn't physically in my life. It felt like she had found a way to invade my space without even being present. As the days passed, the calls began to slow down, but the tension with my mom and stepdad lingered. Every conversation felt like walking on eggshells. I could tell they were torn between their loyalty to me and their guilt over Brianna. It was an absolute mess, and I hated that things had come to this. But no matter how much pressure they put on me, I wasn't going to back down. Brianna had made her choices, and she needed to deal with the fallout. If that meant being the bad guy in her narrative, so be it. Update 3. After all the chaos Brianna had stirred up, you'd think things would finally settle down. But no, she had one last trick up her sleeve. This time, it wasn't just phone calls or guilt trips from relatives. It was something far worse. It started with a knock at my door. Given everything that had happened, I was already on edge about unannounced visitors, so I wasn't exactly thrilled. Peering through the peephole, I saw a man in a uniform. My heart sank, thinking something terrible had happened. I opened the door, and he handed me an envelope, saying, "You've been served." I stared at the envelope, confused and uneasy. I hadn't done anything wrong, so what could this be about? Opening it on the spot, I was shocked to find legal documents inside. It took me a moment to process, but once I understood, I couldn't believe it. Brianna was suing me. For what? To force me to let her and her kids stay in my house. I'm not joking. She had actually filed some kind of claim, accusing me of denying her housing or something equally absurd, essentially trying to legally force me to give up my home for her and her children. I was stunned. I had no idea something like this was even possible. A wave of anger and disbelief washed over me. She couldn't manipulate me emotionally, so now she was trying to take my home through legal action? The first thing I did was call my mom to tell her what had happened. She was just as stunned as I was. "There can't be real," she said, shaking her head. "There's no way she can actually do that." But it was real. I double-checked the documents, and sure enough, Brianna had gone to a lawyer and filed this outrageous claim. I couldn't believe it. Completely stunned, I reached out to a lawyer of my own to figure out my options. Thankfully, he assured me that the entire thing was absurd and wouldn't stand up in court. Still, the fact that Brianna had even tried something like this was beyond belief. While my lawyer told me not to worry too much, he explained that we'd still need to address it legally, so we began preparing. I couldn't wrap my head around how it had come to this. Dealing with a toxic family member, trying to exploit you is one thing, but suing your stepsister to force her to give up her house? That was an entirely new level of entitlement. A few weeks later, the court date was set, and as it approached, I grew increasingly anxious. I knew the law was on my side, but I also knew how manipulative Brianna could be. I was worried she'd find a way to twist the narrative, painting me as the villain yet again, just as she had done with our family. But there was no backing out now. We had to see it through. When the day of the hearing finally arrived, I walked into the courtroom, feeling a combination of anger and nervousness. Brianna was already there with her lawyer, and the smug expression on her face made my blood boil. She didn't look nervous at all. If anything, she seemed confident, as though she truly believed she would win. I sat down beside my lawyer, and we went over everything one last time before the proceedings began. Once the judge called us forward, Brianna's lawyer wasted no time launching into their argument. They painted Brianna as a struggling single mother of 4, claiming that I had heartlessly refused to provide her with housing during her time of need. Listening to them, you'd think I was some cold-hearted monster who had tossed her and her children out onto the street. It was infuriating. Of course, they conveniently left out all the details about how Brianna had mistreated me for years, or how she had shown up at my house uninvited, demanding I move out so she could take over. When it was our turn, my lawyer presented the full picture. He laid out how Brianna had cut me out of her life until she needed something from me, how she had tried to manipulate me into giving up my home, and how there was no real relationship between us. As he spoke, I noticed the judge nodding, clearly understanding my side of the story. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The judge turned to Brianna and asked her directly, "Why do you believe you're entitled to your stepsister's home?" And, just like that, her composure crumbled. She stammered and tried to steer the conversation back to her kids, but the judge wasn't having it. He cut her off and explained firmly that her claim was baseless. He made it clear that I had no legal obligation to provide her with housing and that being in a difficult situation didn't give her the right to exploit family members. Hearing the judge say those words aloud was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Brianna's smug attitude vanished instantly. She looked stunned, like she had been slapped in the face. For the first time, it seemed to hit her that she wasn't going to get her way. She stood there, speechless, unable to argue any further. The judge dismissed the case, and just like that, it was over. I left the courtroom feeling a massive weight lift off my shoulders. Brianna didn't even glance in my direction as she stormed out with her lawyer, grabbing her belongings in a huff. I didn't know what would happen next, but I was certain of one thing. I was done with her for good. When I got home, I called my mom to tell her everything. She sounded relieved, but I could sense her sadness. I knew she was still struggling with the fallout of the situation, and I felt for her, but at the same time, I couldn't keep letting Brianna disrupt my life. Enough was enough. Since then, Brianna hasn't reached out to me. Not a single call, not a text, nothing. Honestly, I'm perfectly fine with that. For the first time in what feels like forever, I finally have my life back, and I'm in control again. So that's the story of how my stepsister tried to take my house and ended up with nothing. It's not the happy ending I'd hoped for, but at least I now know where I stand. And honestly, I'm just grateful it's finally over.